Yes, well, the man on stage needs virtually no introduction at all. I think that's what most of you are here to hear, is Philip Wollen, who is probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known vegan philanthropist in the world, and there's nobody on the planet that I think is doing as good work as Philip. We've heard him introduced many times, so I won't hold up the talk anymore, but I can't just express enough about how we are very grateful for Philip Wollen and for the incredible support that he has given us at Vegetarian Victoria over the many years, from we were a fledgling organisation to now, and the support that he's given us and so many other organisations over the years is just nothing short of astounding. And without his support, I don't think we would have been able to achieve half of what we have. And what you're seeing here at World Vegan Day, we had 17,000 people here last year, and a lot of that growth couldn't have happened with the support that Philip Wollen has given us in the early days. So let's hear it for Philip Wollen.
Now, there's a Swahili saying, if you wish to travel fast, travel alone. If you wish to travel far, travel together. Today, we don't have this binary choice. We have to travel far, and we have to travel fast. Now, if I convinced every audience I speak to immediately become vegan, I would consider my life to be an abject failure. You see, I want everyone to become vegan activists, or to use my terminology, vegan proactivists. King Lear, late at night on the cliffs, asks the blind Earl of Gloucester, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man Gloucester replies, "I see it feelingly." Gloucester must have been a vegan. Rudyard Kipling, writing of young men dying in World War I, and if they ask you why we died, tell them that our fathers lied. That legacy of lies continues today. You see, the world is crying out today for only two things: leadership and the truth. Today, I'm simply going to tell you the truth. The wise Chinese have a term for it, zhengjiao. Listen to the friend who tells you the truth, even when it hurts. So let's just tell the truth, fearlessly and forcefully. That is what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means, the truth force. Now, Brendan Kennelly in the book of Judas wrote, "If you want to serve your age, betray it." But what does that mean, to betray your age? It means expose its lies, humiliate its conceits, debunk its arrogance, and condemn them to face harsher truths. Alvin Toffler said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, there was a time when my favorite food was filet mignon and lobster, a fact for which I am so profoundly ashamed today. So what made me, a young merchant banker, decide to leave the world of lobsters and Learjets in exchange for shelters and slaughterhouses? To take nothing but pictures, own nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints, kill nothing but time. You see, something happened to me. I had been to Dante's Inferno, but unlike Dante Alighieri, I did not have Virgil for my guide or Beatrice for my love. You see, I heard the screams of my dying father as his body was ravaged by the many cancers that killed him. And I realized I'd heard those screams before. In the slaughterhouse, on the cattle ships to the Middle East, and a dying mother whale as a harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. Their cries were the cries of my father. And I discovered that they were equal, and in their capacity to suffer, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. So when I look into your faces here today, I'm reminded of the words of the Greek poet Horace. Change only the name, and my story is also about you. So in 90 seconds, this is where we've invested tens of millions of dollars of our own money over the past 25 years. In China, 7,000 magnificent moon bears, their limbs torn off in traps, are imprisoned in steel coffins welded shut as a catheter drains bile into a bucket which the Chinese drink. For 26 years, the bears go insane. In Korea, where we built a hospital, dogs are beaten to death in the marketplace because the butchers believe that pain and suffering makes the meat tasty. In South Africa, 5,000 tame orphan lions are drugged and killed with guns, spears, or hunting dogs, and they call it sport. In Canada, 300,000 baby seal pups are clubbed and skinned alive on the ice, their tiny hearts still beating. In Australia, to our shame, we killed 90 million kangaroos who adorn our coat of arms, the largest land animal slaughter on the planet. What a bloody disgrace. And we sent millions of our animals born on Australian soil on death ships to the Middle East where their eyes are stabbed out and their tendons are slashed for 30 pieces of silver. Believe me, every penny I invested in the Basatine slaughterhouses in Cairo was utterly wasted. In Asia, dogs are suspended on steel hooks and skinned alive to make fur trim for coats sold in Melbourne. And we treat the ocean as our private pantry and as a public toilet. The Pacific Gyre now is so full of plastic, junk, and human feces, it has created a floating footprint bigger than India. And dolphins and whales are stabbed to death in the shallows of Japan and the Faroe Islands. Huge bays are blood red. 100 million sharks are stabbed and torn from the seas, their fins hacked off, and their bodies thrown overboard to die agonizing deaths for shark fin soup. And factory farms spew chemicals into the oceans, creating hypoxic dead zones of 1 million square kilometers, killing coral, plants, and ocean animals. And so-called unviable dairy calves here in Australia, who cannot be sold for veal, are killed by farmers smashing in their heads with a hammer or jumping on their rib cages and crushing their hearts, because that is the law. And billions of bouncy little chicks are ground up alive in mechanical mincers simply because they are male. And we've just come back from India, and we saw religious sacrifices of innocent animals that make the 21st century look like the new Dark Ages. And children starve in poor countries because their croplands now produce meat for foreigners. I won't be showing you any more pictures, but that's where we work today. That is why I still wake up in the middle of the night screaming with nightmares. Now, in human history, only 100 billion human beings have ever lived. 7 billion people are alive today, and we humans torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. If humans were killed at the same rate, we would be wiped out in 1 weekend. Trillions of fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. Ladies and gentlemen, the oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. If any of my algorithms are correct, it means that no child under the age of 5 is ever going to reach retirement age. It is a mathematical impossibility. If that does not chill your blood. Now, there are 2 peak predators on this planet, human beings on land and orcas in the oceans. In the 20th century, human beings killed 200 million members of their own species. Orcas killed none. And don't expect any protection from your own governments either, regardless of which country you come from. In the 20th century, 100 million people have been killed by their own governments. Now, Victor Hugo said there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But I say there is nothing more destructive than a bad idea whose time has passed. The time for meat has passed, if it ever existed in the first place. Now, the most beautiful word ever written in any language, at any time, in any country, in human history, came from India, from the Upanishads 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. So if we're to follow that, by definition, we must be vegan. Not because it describes our nationality, our politics, our religion, our diet, or our lifestyle, but because it describes our character. Our character. And this is not just about animal rights. This is about human wrongs. Animal rights is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. It is a revolutionary event more powerful than the Industrial Revolution, the Reformation, the Hubble telescope, or anything ever conceived by Galileo, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, or Freud. Because it protects the most precious of all things, life. Vegans are on the right side of history. We are creating the new enlightenment, the second Renaissance. Let it begin at World Vegan Day. Now, the great anthropologist Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a few committed people can change the world. Indeed, that is the only thing that ever has." Well, there are only 13 million Jews in the world. And look at the number of Nobel Prizes they win every year like clockwork. Trix and I sat in the stadium during the Olympics full of pride as Australia, with a small population, won more medals than every country in the world with the exception of the United States and Russia. Tibet's population is only 3 million. But who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan? But there are over 600 million vegetarians and vegans in the world. And that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all put together. If we were one nation, we would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. We are bigger than NATO. We are bigger than OPEC. And despite this massive demographic footprint, we are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cretins who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a bloody question. Animals are not just other species. They are other nations. And we murder them at our own moral peril. Now, Occam's razor, named after the 14th century Jesuit, says that when presented with a number of solutions to a problem, the simplest solution is always the best. So let's apply these tests to the meat industry. Forest depletion by the meat industry costs us 3 times as much every year as the global financial crisis. Many of you saw my debate on TV, getting meat off the menu. Well, Oxford now says it would save $30 trillion in healthcare and environmental damage if we did that. Did you know that human beings comprise 30% of the mass of all land animals? Farm animals account for 66%, and wild animals have been decimated down to 4%. We have turned blue planet Earth into a blood-stained planet slaughterhouse. Here in Australia, we've wiped out more mammal species over the past 200 years than every other country in the world. And now zoonotic diseases from factory farms threaten a pandemic to rival the Black Death, which wiped out half of Europe. The World Bank says that one influenza pandemic alone would cost $3 trillion. We've got more than 70 in the pipeline. As Mark and Jason said, meat and dairy is killing us with cancers, heart disease, and diabetes. We were in Singapore recently and we found out that 34% of Singaporean women under 30 will have diabetes before they're 65. And Singaporean women are very well educated. We're India too, and India will now account for 70% of the world's heart disease by 2020 due to their addiction to dairy. And Medicare has already bankrupted the United States. They would need $8 trillion invested in treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they have precisely zero. They could shut down every school, university, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Homeland Security, FBI, and CIA, and they still will not be able to pay for it. So, how big is $8 trillion? It sounds like a big number, doesn't it? 8 trillion. Well, that's how much the whole of Asia will need over the next 10 years for all their electricity, roads, water, telecommunications, high-speed rail across China, ports in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and the new Silk Road connecting Central Asia to Europe. That's $8 trillion. That's what the meat and dairy industry is costing the Americans. It is 4 times bigger than India's GDP and double the total reserves of India and China combined. That is 5 times bigger than the top 200 companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange and bigger than the top 100 companies on the US Stock Exchange combined. $8 trillion because of this stupid diet. Now, many of you here would know that water is a new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. As a young teenage Boy Scout, I drilled my first well and struck sweet water at 80 feet. Recently, we're in Bangalore and we're building an orphanage there nearby, and at 800 feet, we're sucking mud. In China, at 3,000 feet, the drill head is still dry. Now, everyone here would be outraged if 10 jumbo jets crashed every day with no survivors. Well, the same number of children die every day through water-related diseases. The mighty Colorado River, the Rio Grande, the Indus, and the Yellow Rivers now no longer reach the sea, sucked dry by the meat and dairy industry, whilst 4 billion people suffer from water scarcity. So why do I speak to you about water? Because it takes 50,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef. It takes 1,000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of milk, and a dairyman makes 28 cents for it. 1 billion people today are hungry. 20 million people will die this year from malnutrition. Cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and going vegan ends malnutrition forever. And you would know food prices are skyrocketing. It used to cost me for Thai rice for my projects in Southeast Asia, $197 a ton. And then it went up to 1,015. A 5-fold increase in 5 months. And poor countries sell their grain to the West for hard currency whilst their own children starve in their arms and the West feeds it to livestock. So we can eat a steak? I bet I'm not the only one in this room who sees that as a crime. Believe me, every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into her eyes, do I remain silent? If everyone ate a Western diet, we would need 2 planet Earths to feed us. We've only got 1 and she is dying. The Earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And our greenhouse gas pollution from livestock vastly exceeds that of transport. Planes, trains, cars, buses, lorries, ships, the whole lot. And their methane is 24 times more potent than CO2. We've been in Russia, the Umal Peninsula. The melting Siberian permafrost is now a ticking time bomb. When it releases its sequestered gas, the game is over. The Himalayan ice fields are correctly called the third pole because they feed half the world's population through the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yangtze, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong, and the Yellow Rivers. And these glaciers are melting fast, really fast. I presented these numbers in a speech to 2,000 wealthy Indian entrepreneurs in New Delhi. And sitting in the front row was Amartya Sen, India's Nobel Prize winner in economics. And I mentioned to Muhammad Yunus after he won the Nobel Peace Prize that all the good that he had done with Grameen Bank would vanish when Bangladesh drowned. To say nothing about Manila, Mumbai, Calcutta, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangkok. And Trix and I had dinner with Al Gore, and we discussed the same numbers. And I delivered a speech here in Melbourne with Dr. Peter Doherty, who'd recently won Australia's Nobel Prize in medicine. No arguments at all from 4 Nobel laureates, or from the MPs I addressed in the Parliament in The Hague, or the President of Israel when I addressed the Knesset Parliament in Israel, and when we met in his house privately for coffee. No arguments from these great men, only arguments from the meat and dairy lobby. So Upton Sinclair was right. It is impossible to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. We spoke to Admiral Denny McGinn, the chief of US warfighting requirements, and he said, "We have learned that nations will raid and invade long before they starve." Well, we freak out here in Australia when 1,000 refugees arrive on our shores. Just imagine greenhouse gas emissions hitting 500 parts per million, or a 3-degree temperature rise, creating 100 million eco-refugees in this area alone. This calamity will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. We are facing the perfect storm. If any nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back into the Bronze Age. But we can't, because it is not a rogue state. It's an industry. Meat. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. So George Bush was wrong. The axis of evil does not run through Iraq, Iran, or North Korea. It runs through our dining tables. Weapons of mass destruction are our knives and forks, and increasingly nowadays, our chopsticks. You see, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. This disgusting industry will end because we run out of excuses. Believe me, veganism is the Swiss Army knife of the future. One instrument solves our ethical, economical, environment, water, health problems, and ends animal cruelty forever. Veganism is the enchanted key. It opens locked doors to secret rooms in your own castle. It rearranges the furniture of your mind. It is our friend, it is our future, and it is the only future worth having. And farmers are actually the ones with the most to gain. Farming won't end, it would boom. Only the product line would change. Farmers would make so much money they wouldn't even bother counting it, and I'd be the first to applaud them. Remember, I do come from the bush. Governments would love us. New industries would emerge and flourish. Health insurance premiums would plummet. Hospital waiting lists would disappear. Hell, we would be so healthy we'd have to shoot someone just to start a cemetery. Now, did you know recently that 40 investors with $2 trillion in assets want global food companies to replace animal protein with plant protein? Mark is an expert on this subject. Did you also know that plant-based food industries in the United States contribute $14 billion per annum to the US economy, has created 60,000 jobs, pays its workers $13,000 a year in salary more than the average American salary, pays $1.1 billion in tax, produces 10 times fewer greenhouse gas emissions than beef, and gets no subsidies. Plant-based food, that's the future. And veganism gives us the peace dividend. I addressed the World Parliament of Religions, and I said, the peace map is drawn on a menu. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Justice must be blind to race, color, religion, and to species. If it is not blind, it will be used as a weapon of terror. And today there is unimaginable terror in those ghastly gulags we call slaughterhouses and factory farms. So talking about peace while still killing animals is like loving literature and burning books. They are mutually exclusive ideas. So in my journey through Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, I've learned that a man is measured not by how much money he makes, but by how much of it he is willing to give away, particularly to strangers. And if you wish to increase a man's share of happiness, do not aim to increase his possessions. Simply decrease his desires. Socrates and Epicurus were right. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's not a life, it's a life sentence. And my heart resonates to the words of W.H. Auden. If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. I know it will be hard, but please remember Martin Luther King's words. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it polite? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? Is killing right? We need a new kind of jurisprudence, a new legal system, a foro conscientiae, a court of the conscience. Now, I speak to audiences all around the world, and they're all good, caring, decent, loving people who genuinely want to change the world, as long as they don't have to change themselves. But life does not work that way. First, we change in our hearts, and then the world follows. True leaders like you must face your own demons courageously. Martin Niemöller, the German priest, philosopher, and U-boat captain, spent 8 years in prison for condemning German intellectuals for being cowards. And he wrote, when the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I did not speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. Men and women of integrity must speak out and act courageously. Is it not better to light a candle than to curse the darkness? All the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of a single candle. You see, I believe another day is dawning, and if I close my eyes, I can feel her heartbeat. So don't be afraid, regardless of the odds. Remember Gandhi's words. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Now, the last sentence of Scott Fitzgerald's book, The Great Gatsby, reads, so we beat on, boats against the tide, drawn back ceaselessly into the past. I ask you, are we to live forever in a sick, smug, and cruel past? Let's not relive history. Let's make history, because that is what leaders do. They make history. Judge White's closing words in The Bonfire of the Vanities were, the law is humanity's clumsy attempt at decency. So I ask you all to join the battle in a war that decency cannot afford to lose. Because in the end, only three things matter. How deeply you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things that were not meant for you. Meat was not meant for you. Our animal cousins have survived millions of years of evolution on this planet. They've earned the right to share it with us in peace, and they have waited long enough. The brutes and the bullies have been Goliath, but David is coming. Maybe he's one of you. Maybe he's in this room. I hope so. Maybe he is one of you. But if not you, who? And if not now, when? Thank you all for being here.
Standing ovation. I was going to ask for it. Philip Wollen, everybody. Keep it going. A highlight of World Vegan Day every year.